Hope you all had a good bite to eat. And thank you for coming to the 18th Annual Groundhog Day Economic Forecast. I'm John Kelly with Tuscarawas County Economic Development Corporation. And we've been kind of sponsoring and leading this event for all those years. And really appreciate you guys being here and continuing to learn and to grow and to see what's coming in our economy around the world. I want to thank everyone for being here, including our virtual viewers. We have, 15 or so that I'm aware of that are watching virtually, so welcome. I want to thank the folks from ChemSpec and Lucas, why don't you stand up? So they sponsored breakfast, so thank ChemSpec. There's always a bunch of people, and Dave, I'm sorry I didn't see you back there, Dave. And thank you very much. But they've been sponsoring breakfast for the last few years. Really appreciate that. I want to give Dean Brad Bilski a moment to say welcome.
So I'm getting older and I don't want to go up and down stairs as much anymore. But welcome to Kent State University at Tuscarawas. You know, many years ago we used to do this event over in S&T 126, and then it got too big, and so we moved it to Founders Hall. Then a global pandemic hit and nobody came. But then I think we had the online version for a while, and our friends at First Vet hosted the event in their beautiful facility for a number of years. But you know, we've got over 100, 120 people here today, so we're back here in Founders Hall where it all kind of began many years ago. Just a brief commercial for the campus. You know, enrollment here remains very strong, so we were up 14% in the fall semester and another 6 to 7% here in the spring semester. So things are looking really good. Our women's volleyball team won our national championship this year, and on March 12th, we'll be down at the State House in Columbus, and Senator Landis will be giving us a proclamation for that achievement, so we're really happy about that. And we really appreciate each and every one of you continuing to support this campus, whether through your business, your personal generosity, or bringing your events here to campus. Because you know, here we are once again. You know, just a couple nights ago, we had the chamber banquet over in the Performing Arts Center, and Michael, I think you can draw 1,000. I really do. So. If we ever get to that point where we draw 1,000, we'll have that event over at the Performing Arts Center. It is such a great honor to have Michael back again. Fantastic, brilliant speaker, and funny too. And in the hallway, we were doing the over-under on how many Browns references that we're going to have here today. So,
there's going to be a lot.
Thank you all for coming, and thanks to the EDC for hosting and sponsoring this event again.
Do we have anybody here that's been here every year since it started? There were. Yeah, Bill? Congratulations. It doesn't surprise me.
How do they manage?
And those of you that are here for the first time, you're in for a treat. It's a fascinating journey through the global economy. And Michael, I have a gift for you, and right now it's sitting in the corner of my office where I left it yesterday. But it'll be here by the end.
Browns tickets, right?
It is brown. I'll give you that.
Yeah.
It's brown. But I've got a cool gift today, local gift, locally made. So without further ado, Michael Weidokal, world-renowned economist, works here in Northeast Ohio and also in Europe. And so we want to thank you once again for being here, and you're up. Batter up.
All right.
And we will have about an hour presentation, then we'll have time for questions. So let's hold those to the end. Thank you.
So this is our some feedback. This is our 18th event. Yeah. I was 15 years old when we started. 14. All right. I wish. Well, it's great to see everybody here today. 18 times. We started in the Economic Development Corporation building on the river, I think it was, initially. and we were about 15 people, and it's just grown and grown. So it's great to see everybody again. We've got a lot to get to besides Brown's jokes, which are coming, don't worry. A lot's happening in the world. In fact, I was just reading the news before I got up here, figuring something had changed in the time it took me to drive down from the west side of Cleveland today. It was a little quiet this morning. So let's get started. What are we going to talk about today? If you've been here before, you kind of know the agenda. We're going to talk about what's happening in the world now, economically, politically, and we're going to talk about the next few years, what's going on in the world. Can you hear me okay? No? Here, give me that. I have a big mouth. I can just talk loud. There, that might work better. So we'll talk about what's happening in the world right now, economically, politically, et cetera. We'll talk about the next couple years. Going to talk about a couple big issues that are impacting the economy around the world and right here in Tuscarawas County, things like population change, technological change, et cetera. Take a long-term outlook at the world, and then we'll talk about how you can prepare for all of these challenges that we're going to talk about today. And then if you have some nice, easy questions for me at the end, I'll be happy to take those. We have quite a bit of time for Q&A. A little bit about me. I'm the founder of the company ISA, International Strategic Analysis, founded back in 2003, so 22 years ago. Some of you I've seen have my best-selling thriller, The Coming Decline, A World Without Economic Growth. It is a page-turner if you have problems sleeping or need some uplifting message to read about. I do quite a bit of speaking and, of course, quite a bit of advisory work as well. There it is. If you do have problems sleeping, I recommend this. This is a fantastic tour of the world and its economic challenges. And let's just get started. We've got a lot to talk about because the world economy, of course, is a constantly changing place right now. This chart, and I know it's hard to read. You'll all get a copy of the presentation, so if you can't read certain numbers, don't worry about it. This shows confidence in the economy around the world. And quite frankly, confidence levels in most parts of the world, economically speaking, have been very low. And in some cases, it's justified, in others, it's not. But right now, there is a lack of confidence among consumers, among businesses, and among investors in many parts of the world. Why is that? Well, there's many reasons for it. First, you've seen this chart. If you've been here 18 years, and wow, that's a long time to come hear me talk. If you've been here 18 years, you've seen this chart every year. It shows just how fast the global economy is growing. So before the pandemic, the global economy grew about 3.5%, 3.6% per year. Very steady growth, remarkably steady growth, in fact. We had the pandemic, we had a recession, we had the bounce back, and now global economy is growing at about 3.2% per year. It's grown by 3.2% in each of the past 2 years. Now that's better than was expected, quite frankly, but it's still 10 to 15% slower than where we were before the pandemic. What's important to note is this growth has really been concentrated in just a few countries and a few industries. This is not broad across the board growth. This has really been concentrated growth with certain industries, certain countries generating most of this growth. What about in the U.S.? Well, you heard yesterday the U.S. economy grew by 2.3% annualized in the fourth quarter of last year. That means the U.S. economy for the year last year grew by 2.8%. That's a lot better than most economists were predicting beforehand. The U.S. economy did a lot better in recent years than anybody really predicted. If you remember previous speeches in previous years, I was talking about how there was a 40–50% chance of a recession according to US-based economists. At the beginning of 2023, over 50% of major bank US economists forecasted a recession over the next 12 months. It never came. The US economy kept growing. So 2.8%, that's a pretty remarkable achievement given the climate around the world, the economic climate, the political climate around the world. So why has the U.S. been doing better than most of its rich world peers? Well, one reason is competitiveness. The U.S. economy remains extremely competitive compared to other rich world economies. The U.S. also has a very strong presence in high growth sectors of the economy, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then immigration, our numbers went up. Immigration contributed a solid share of this, a solid share of this growth comes from immigration. Compare that to Europe. Now, these numbers are a tiny bit dated because Europe grew by 0.7%. They just released their numbers last year in 2024. But nevertheless, you could see Europe doing far worse than the United States economy in recent years. Almost no growth at all. Why is this? A lack of competitiveness, a lack of presence in those sectors of the economy that are generating growth. U.S. has them. U.S. has a high degree of competitiveness. Europe doesn't. And you get what you see there. Very poor numbers. Germany's economy, for example, has shrunk for 2 consecutive years. The French economy, almost no growth in recent years. So contrast the situation in the United States, where many of us think the economy is doing quite poorly, and compare that to our, let's say, closest peer in the world, Europe, and the picture is quite striking. This chart shows the average rate of economic growth over the last 5 years in the world's large developed economies. It just reiterates what I just said. The U.S. economy has been outperforming its peers significantly. So if Germany were an NFL team, they would be the Browns, right? Down here. That's one. What's the over-under anyway on the jokes? Like 7, 8? And the U.S. would be the Chiefs. There we go. Where are the referees helping them out? Something's going on. I have nothing against the Chiefs. You can see the U.S. economy's been doing pretty well. And if we compare ourselves to our peer economies, other wealthy economies, the U.S. has done extremely well. And it's those countries you see there with high-tech or large commodity sectors that are generating most of the growth in recent years. What about emerging markets? Now, China, of course, is in focus. There's a lot going on with China right now, a lot of questions about will there be another major trade war between the U.S. and China. We'll probably get some tariff decisions in the coming days, which will go a long way to determining that. The Chinese economy has been extremely volatile in recent years. Now, remember, for 30 years, China's economy grew by 10% per year. Then for another decade, it grew by about 7% per year. But look what's happened in recent years. A lot of volatility and much lower rates of growth. China's economy last year grew by 5%, and it only made it to 5% because the government there enacted all these stimulus measures at the end of the year. And the problem in China is not exports. China's still exporting, especially manufactured goods, to a very high degree. It's the domestic market in China. Chinese consumers are not spending. They're very concerned about the health of the Chinese economy. We've talked in previous years about how China has big problems with regards to debt in the real estate sector, in the infrastructure sector. So Chinese consumers have lost a lot of confidence. And keep in mind, for a lot of US-based companies, this was going to be the big growth market. Yeah, we invest in China to build things, but one day they're going to start buying our products as their consumers become wealthier and they start to spend more. But look what's happening. That's not happening. China's economy not growing as fast as had been hoped for, and it's because of weakness in the domestic market. You add to that the fact that China's population is shrinking. It shrank by over 1 million people last year. Nobody in China is having babies. There's suddenly a big labor shortage in China. There's very few young people in China. And there's a lot of concerns about the health of the world's second largest economy. What about India? India, a lot of companies are now looking at India as perhaps the next big growth market. We've had China for a long time. What about India? India, of course, also a very volatile economy. It recovered from the pandemic pretty well, but look what's happened over the past year. Its economy is slowing again. It slowed to about 5% in the second half of last year. So is India going to provide the growth that China provided in previous decades? Probably not. It's going to grow, certainly. There's going to be a lot of opportunities for growth, but it's not going to be able to emulate what China has done in previous decades. So there's that same chart we saw for the world's wealthier countries. This is for the world's emerging markets. And this is the first time, and I've 18 years, and I've been doing this speech for over 20 in total, that a non-East Asian or South Asian country has been on top of that list. Turkey has been the fastest growing large emerging market over the last 5 years, 5.4% per year. Then a lot of Asian economies, as you can see, and then you can see a lot of the rest of the world struggling to grow. Sub-Saharan Africa growing by less than 3% per year. Latin America by less than 2% per year. Again, If we were here 10 or 12 years ago, we were talking about those being big growth markets. They've disappointed for sure in recent years. The growth remains concentrated, at least among emerging markets, in Asia. So where's the growth been coming from? This shows over the last decade the contribution to global economic growth. And it's the US. The US has accounted for almost 1/3 of additional economic growth in the world over the last decade. That wasn't expected. A lot of people were expecting emerging markets to be the main driver of growth, of course, in the 2020s. That's not what's happened. The US economy has been generating a lot of growth, and it's not in foreign companies realize this. That's why there's been so much foreign investment in the United States really over the last decade, because of this chart right there. This is where the growth has been over the last decade. And you can see some of those regions where companies have been investing a lot, or investing in regions that are yet to contribute significant growth. India, 5% of the world's economic growth coming from India. Africa, less than 1%. Africa's home to Sub-Saharan Africa is home to 1.3 billion people, 1.4 billion people. And yet just 1% or less than 1% of global economic growth is generated there. What about by sector? Which sectors are driving growth? This is the US economy we're looking at here. Where's the growth come from in the last 3 years? What a surprise, it's come from energy primarily. The biggest driver of growth for the American economy over the last 3 years has been the energy sector. No surprise, we had the war in Ukraine that generated higher energy prices. We've had a massive increase in our energy output in the United States in recent years. You hear people say, drill, baby, drill, but we've been. We are generating a lot of growth. So 14% growth per year in the energy sector, the mining and energy sector, it's primarily energy. In the US, where else is the growth coming from? Consumers, no surprise, right? The retail sector growing by almost 7% per year over the last 3 years. Then, of course, information and healthcare. No surprises at all there. Where's the growth not coming from? It's not really been coming from manufacturing, has it? No, our manufacturing sector is not growing very much. We talk about reshoring all the time, but we have some big constraints when it comes to reshoring, particularly on the labor side. I talk to a lot of companies, especially here in the Midwest, and their number one problem for expansion are labor shortages, quite frankly. Construction, logistics, very little growth as well, and the finance sector has actually declined over the last 3 years. So a lot of those traditional industries that generated a lot of growth for the US economy, they haven't been doing as well. The growth has been concentrated in a few sectors near the top. And those are sectors where the US is very strongly placed. And that's why the US economy has been doing better than its peers. We have vast energy resources. We have consumers who like to spend and are paid well compared to their international counterparts. We have the world's leading high-tech sector. We have one of the world's leading healthcare sectors. Economic competitiveness and choosing the right sectors to grow have been the catalyst for the better US economic performance. And it's the same for your business, right? Choosing which sectors you're going to invest in is the key decision. Are you in a sector that's going to provide growth over the next 5, 10, 15 years? Or are you going to be in a sector of the economy that is likely to decline in the coming years? It's been a year of political change, obviously. Over the last 12 months, voters in countries with a population of greater than 4 billion people went to the polls. We've had some massive elections, obviously here in the United States, but also in many other places. There have been some incredible political changes underway in many parts of the world, which we'll talk about. Of course, we had the big election here in November. Donald Trump defeated Kamala Harris by 1.5%. It's only the third time in the last 10 elections that the Republican candidate has won the popular vote. Republicans also control the Congress now, so we have a administration now in power that has more power, at least for the next 2 years, than most previous administrations, at least over the last couple of decades. And we'll talk more about politics going forward. Don't worry, I know you can't wait to talk about that. Also, geopolitics, right? There's a lot going on in the world. We have conflicts in Ukraine, we have conflicts in the Middle East and in Africa. Now we have Greenland on the agenda. How many people had that in their geopolitical bingo card, that Greenland was going to be the biggest flashpoint of 2025, maybe the Panama Canal? It is a time of great geopolitical uncertainty and geopolitical risk. And that raises economic risk, of course, especially when it involves great powers, whether it be the United States, China, or others. On the economic front, inflation just won't quite go away, will it? It's obviously not what it was a few years ago, but it's still sticking around. We saw what the Federal Reserve said. They're very concerned about inflation. In fact, inflation has been rising again, slowly, in many of the world's leading economies. It's come down from where it was, as you see clearly from that chart, but it's higher than most central banks would like it to be. There's one exception, of course, that's China. China's dealing with deflation, which is more dangerous. Quite frankly, it's harder to deal with deflation than inflation. China's been dealing with this for over a year, and there's a lot of economists, myself included, who think China could be following the path Japan went on in the 1990s, where deflationary pressures took hold, and they couldn't really get out of it. And it resulted in 3 decades of stagnation for the Japanese economy. China's facing a very similar situation. Its population is shrinking dramatically fast. It's facing trade conflicts with many of its leading trade partners, and this is a significant risk to the Chinese economy. Now, because inflation in the rest of the world is remaining high, central banks are saying, you know what? We might want to slow down on this interest rate cut idea. Not all. The European Central Bank cut interest rates yesterday again, but the European economy is very weak. But the Federal Reserve has said, we're not cutting rates until at least the late spring. And we're going to look in the late spring to see what's happening with inflation to make a decision on that. So the forecast at the beginning of the year, or a couple of months ago, was 3 interest rate cuts this year, which is less than it was a few months ago. That might be optimistic, quite frankly. As long as inflation remains high and it's being driven up by wages continue to go up, food prices remain high. A lot of it is cost of living related inflation. And that's why you see this pessimism in the economy. You can say, look at the US economy is doing great, but why are so many voters pessimistic about it? It's cost of living issues, food prices, housing prices going through the roof. So the central bank, which was hoping to be able to start cutting interest rates more aggressively this year, now starting to look like, well, we might want to hold off as long as inflation remains high. One of the things keeping inflation high as well is that labor shortages persist. The unemployment rates, even though they've gone up from where they were a couple years ago, remain remarkably low, 4.1% here in the US. Many of these unemployment rates remain quite low, and this isn't going to change. We're not going to see a huge spike in unemployment. We are going to see massive changes to the labor force, which we're going to talk about later, however. Technological-driven changes to the labor force as well as demographic-driven. So what's happened? We've had a very uneven recovery from the pandemic over the last few years. Some economies have done well, some sectors of the economy have done well, but many have not. Many of the traditional drivers of growth, whether it be a country, whether it be an industry, have done very poorly in recent years, while others have managed to generate pretty high rates of growth. So what's going to happen? That's where we are. That's easy. Anybody can put that together and say, yeah, this is how we got this. This is where we are right now. What's going to happen over the next couple of years? By near term, I mean the next 3 years. So let's get into it. First of all, we're forecasting lower economic growth, slightly slower economic growth for the global economy. So down to 3.1% next year and just below 3% over the next couple of years. Is there a chance of a sharper decline? Yes. Undoubtedly there is. When the economy is dependent upon a few countries and a few industries that generate most of its growth, it is more exposed to a downside risk. We saw that in the dot-com bubble in 1999 and 2000. We're kind of in that position right now. Now, we're not forecasting that to happen, but the potential for that to happen has certainly risen over the last few months. As far as the US, we're forecasting growth of 2.6% next year, which we might tick down to 2.5. We were just discussing that. And then down to 2.1 in 2026. Now, that's a slowdown, but it's still relatively strong compared to where we were, what we were thinking where we were a couple of years ago. This is pretty much in line with most major forecasters at the moment in terms of growth. There's a couple who think it might grow a little faster. There are some who are predicting slower growth, but nevertheless, because of the US's presence in these high growth sectors of the economy, we expect decent growth going forward. Europe, again, relatively anemic growth, less than 1% next year, just above 1% in the 2 years thereafter. This is because Europe's biggest economies aren't going to generate much growth. Germany, France, Italy, for example, are not going to grow much at all. It's going to be smaller European countries, those with bigger high-tech sectors, more flexible economies that are likely to grow at a faster pace. So those are our forecasts for the next the next 3 years, excuse me. Playing the role of the browns now is Italy at 0.7% at the bottom. U.S., again, forecast to grow faster than any large economy over the next 3 years, as you can see. But that chart looks a lot like the chart from the last 5 years. And quite frankly, if this were the last 25 years, it wouldn't look all that much different. The same countries have been growing at a faster pace for some time than others when it comes to the developed economies. As far as China is concerned, we're forecasting a slowdown to 4.5% growth this year and eventually below 4% within 3 years. This is a far cry from the 10% growth per year, and this is a major challenge. This is causing political uncertainty in China. This is causing public anger to rise in China. China stopped releasing a lot of their economic statistics because of the concern that the statistics were putting the country in quite a bad light. They don't release youth unemployment numbers anymore, for example. There's a lot of young Chinese people who can't find jobs anymore, whereas 10 years ago they couldn't, they were turning down 10 or 12 jobs. So things have changed dramatically in China in recent years, and that's a concern, obviously, because it is both a political rival but also a growth market for many of the world's companies. So there you see the average rates of economic growth over the next 3 years for emerging markets. It's Asia. Even with China slowing down, other Asian countries are doing quite well. And they're attracting a lot of investment in manufacturing, in their domestic market potential. And so Asia, even with China slowing, remains a key driver of growth. Other areas of the world growing a little bit faster, where Latin America forecast to pick up a little speed. Mexico near the bottom. Mexico just grew by 1.3% last year. It was a disappointing end to the year for Mexico. They just released their fourth quarter numbers yesterday, and they were quite poor, in fact. But Latin America forecast to do a little better than it's been doing. Africa forecast to do a little better than it's been doing in recent years. Which sectors are going to grow? Certainly, the Browns tickets. Oh, wow. It'll be like, oh, no, leave it there. The Browns tickets, no one's going to steal them. I'm kidding. Which sectors of the economy are going to grow? Obviously, some of those that have been growing that we've seen, but there's others as well. Healthcare is going to grow. We're getting older. Healthcare costs are going through the roof. The healthcare sector has a lot of potential for growth around the world, quite frankly. The energy sector, demand for energy, as we're going to talk about, going up around the world. Defense. The world is a more risky place these days, so countries are now promising to spend almost double on defense what they did just a few years ago. These are sectors of the economy that have the potential to generate a lot of growth. And identifying growth sectors is one of the key jobs when you're coming up with your strategies for your business. Which sectors of the economy can provide us growth going forward? As far as where the growth is going to come from by country, the U.S. is still going to be the leading driver of growth for the world. The U.S. is a $30 trillion economy, so when it grows 2% or 3%, it's generating a lot of growth for the rest of the world. And other regions, somewhat behind still as we go forward. Of course, we'd be remiss to not talk about what the economic impact of the Trump presidency is going to be. Globally, the big question on everybody's mind is tariffs. Which tariffs are going to be enacted? He's promised or threatened tariffs on a wide range of countries. He's not really enacted much yet. He threatened Colombia, for example, but then they reached a deal so that those weren't implemented. But he has promised to make some decisions on tariffs in the next couple weeks. And that's leaving a lot of countries very exposed, not just because they export to the United States, but because this will lead to spiraling tariffs in other parts of the world. There'll be retaliatory tariffs on U.S. exports, and then there'll be probably some trade wars going on elsewhere. So this shows just who's exposed to the US economy, obviously Mexico and Canada. Mexico and Canada, almost 80% of their exports go to the US. That leaves those countries tremendously exposed. Here in Ohio, we obviously have a lot of trade with Ontario across the water. Our supply chains are very intertwined with what goes on there. This is a big risk for a lot of companies here, just because so many components are traveling across the border between the US and Canada there. So it is a significant threat to many manufacturing companies here in Northeast Ohio. Geopolitical risk, it's not going to go away. The big one, of course, is what's going to happen with the US and China. There is talk of a meeting between President Trump and President Xi at some point in the coming months. There's been very little dialogue between US and Chinese leaders over the last 6 or 7 years. So that would be a welcome development, certainly, that the leaders from the two sides would get together. But that remains to be seen which direction that will go. One interesting thing I'd like to point out is we've talked about how well the US economy has done, but when it comes to exporting, the US has done worse over the last decade than any other large economy. Exports from the US have grown by less than 20% over the last decade. That's a slower rate than any other big economy in the world. Why is that? Well, it's two things. One, the US economic success has been because of its domestic market. The US domestic market, US consumers, that's what's been driving growth. The other thing is the US dollar has been very strong since 2014. There was a dramatic shift in exchange rates in 2014. We talked about that a lot back in the 7th and 8th annual ones, whatever it was back then. And it hasn't gone away. And I did say at the time the dollar is not coming down. The dollar is going to be strong for the foreseeable future, and it has been, and it will be. Investors still flock to the dollar at times of risk. There's a lot of risk out there. The US economic outlook is stronger than most other major economies. All of these factors are going to mean the dollar is going to remain relatively strong. And that's going to be a big challenge for you as an exporter, because your costs obviously are in a currency that's strong, and your revenues, your export revenues, are in currencies that have depreciated. And this situation is not going to change over the next couple of years. Now, we've talked about this briefly. Companies want to be here in the US, and it's a combination of the reward of being here in the US and the coercion provided by the US government. Both the Trump and the Biden administrations have made it very clear to foreign companies, you have to be present in the US if you want to avoid tariffs, if you want to win government contracts. And it's worked. Over the last decade, the US economy has received $3 trillion of foreign investment. Foreign companies, foreign governments, et cetera, have invested $3 trillion. Look at how that compares to the rest of the world. Double China and more than, almost 8 times bigger than Germany, just in the last decade. And this trend is actually accelerating, whereas foreign investment in China has been declining for the last 2 years. Foreign investment in the United States continues to pick up. If you're a foreign company, you can't resist the pull of 345 million consumers, but a lot of them have pretty deep pockets. We're willing to spend. We don't save much here. It's a very attractive lure for foreign companies. So $3 trillion of foreign investment in the last decade. That's quite an achievement. So we're going to have a gradual slowdown, a very slight slowdown. We're not predicting a big crash, though it cannot be ruled out at this moment. Risk levels are going to remain high, and growth is going to continue to be uneven. So choosing those countries and those industries and those markets that are going to provide you with growth is really a key decision for you going forward. So what I want to talk about next are 4 big factors that are kind of influencing the economy today and will influence the economy even more in the coming years. The first, and we've talked about this many times in the past in one form or another, is the fact that population is changing. And it's changing primarily because people aren't having babies anymore. The baby-making game has gone out the window. Birth rates have collapsed in many parts of the world. Even here in the United States, where we were pretty good at making babies, our birth rate is now 1.6. So the average woman has to have 2.1 babies in her lifetime to keep your population steady if you don't have immigration or emigration. We used to be well above that. Now we're down to 1.6. South Korea recorded last year the lowest birth rate in history for a country not at war. The average woman in South Korea now has 0.7 babies in her lifetime. That's it. China, it's like 1.1. Many parts of Europe, 1.2, 1.3. We're simply not producing enough future consumers and future workers. And this may be good for the planet, right? I'm not saying there's not some benefits to this, but it's really a challenge for the economy. One way of looking at the challenge is who's disappearing. Well, young people are disappearing. This chart shows over 25-year intervals the change in the population for people under the age of 18. And look, you can see in the United States after World War II, it grew by almost 50%. Since then, it's been growing very little. Over the next 25 years, the number of people under the age of 18 will actually decline in the United States. And I know certainly here in Northern Ohio, it's been declining rapidly. It's a big challenge here in Northeast Ohio, the fact that there are less and less people under the age of 18. It's a problem for the education system. It's a problem if your business is focused on young consumers, your market is disappearing. And it's even worse in Europe, and it's much worse in China. China's under 18 population will shrink by 40% over the next 25 years. One generation, a 40% decline. Again, this bodes very ill for the future because these are our future workers, our future consumers. As far as working age population, the picture is not quite as dire yet, but it's getting worse. This is, of course, the heartbeat of the economy right here. In the US, our working age population grew by about 20% over the last 25 years. It's forecast to grow by less than 10% over the next 25 years. And this growth is highly uneven. There are parts of the United States where this is still growing rapidly, and there are other parts of the United States where this is already declining. And again, for many people in this part of the world, labor availability is the number one challenge to their business. In Europe, it's declining. China's working age population will shrink by more than 20%. Chinese workers were the driver of the Chinese economic miracle, and now they're disappearing. I can remember being in China. You'd be outside the soccer stadium, and there'd be tens of thousands of people on a Monday morning just looking for their work for the week. People would just come and hire them for the construction site or for whatever it might be. Now there's going to be a dearth of workers there. So this is a huge challenge. And people will say, well, just who cares? AI and automation is going to take their job, is going to make up for those losses. Maybe a little, but we don't have robots yet that are buying shoes or buying clothes. So on the consumption side, this is going to be a big challenge. On the demand side of the basic economic equation, this is going to be a big challenge. Now there is one area of the world where the population is still growing, that's Africa. Africa's population will grow by 1 billion people by the year 2050. That's a lot. So our company is going to move to Africa to take advantage of that new labor force. We haven't really seen that yet. There's not been a lot of investment in manufacturing yet in Africa. In job creation type of industries, right now it's mostly extraction industries, which don't create a lot of jobs. So that's going to be a challenge as well. But who is growing? It's the over 65 population. Right now there's about a little more than 800 million people in the world over the age of 65. By the year 2050, there'll be 1.6 billion. So it'll double. There'll be double the number of people in the world over the age of 65. We'll still be doing this, right? By then, or have our 35th annual, 36th annual, whatever it may be. But you can see that this is where the growth is coming. And these people have a lot of money. But what is the challenge here? Most people over the age of 65 are no longer productive members of society. Many of them would like to be productive. They'd like to continue working. It's much more difficult for people over the age of 65 to be hired by many companies. They're expensive. People are concerned about their health. Not for presidents, obviously, but for everybody else. Can't believe we're doing that again. We just went through that once. No. Anyways, I digress. So this is a growth market. How do you take advantage of it? What types of products and services do people over the age of 65, what do they consume? They're going to consume a lot, right? Not just cruises. There's a lot of opportunity for growth here. There's a lot of money here. And that you can see, we need to, one, have more products and services available for this population, but two, we have to find a way to make them productive. Japan is trying to raise their retirement age to 70 for certain jobs. Obviously, there are jobs you can't do well into your 70s. I get that. But there are many jobs that can be done by people well into advanced age. And we need to find ways of making this segment of the population more productive because, quite frankly, our government finances are not going to survive long term if we don't improve the financial situation surrounding the over 65 population. We're not generating enough revenues from them, and our expenditures are going through the roof. It's not just the age. Our population is changing in many other ways as well. The characteristics, whether it be ethnicity, culture, language, lifestyle, is changing as well. And these changes are bringing both positives and negatives, right? Many of our newest and most successful companies are founded by sons and daughters of immigrants or people who had new ideas. But at the same time, society is resistant to a lot of this change. It's causing a significant amount of social tension. And the world is simply looking and thinking differently than it did. And this is a trend that's been going on for a long time, but clearly it's going to continue. People have different priorities. They have different lifestyles. On the demand side, consumption preferences are changing. Look at the way young people spend their money versus the way previous generations did. Experience, for example, much more important than tangible assets. Many things are changing. Going out. I had a lunch with one of the people who owns a bunch of restaurants in Cleveland a couple weeks ago. He says, yeah, we just can't, our business is suffering because young people don't go out like our generations did before. And so it's a major challenge understanding these changes. At the same time, this is happening on the labor side of the equation. People have different working preferences. They don't envision themselves working for the same company their entire lives. They don't envision going to the office 5 times a week in many parts of the world. It's a big fight right now in many areas. How do companies get people back in the office? So what does this mean? Well, first of all, we're facing demographic decline. There's no way about it. We could start having babies tomorrow, so that would be in 9 months they'd start coming around, but that would take a generation until that had any real impact on the economy. So this is coming. Be ready for it. Labor shortages are not going away, and for some of you, your business, your core market is going to decline. You need to adapt to that. We have an older population. Our population is just going to get older and older as we live longer and the younger population shrinks. And people have different priorities, and those priorities are changing, both in terms of what they want to purchase and what they do for work. So that's one, and that's a big challenge. Our economy's been driven by demography since the Industrial Revolution. Another one is rising levels of political risk. Political risk is going up, and it's going up in many ways. The center is disappearing in many parts of the world. We see both on the right and on the left more what some would call extreme or right-wing or left-wing politics, which is resulting in a decline in the center. And the two sides are not agreeing on much of anything anymore. Just look at Senate voting records or congressional voting records. Look at how many times in the 60s, 70s, 80s, even in the 90s, how people would cross the aisle and vote with the other side many times. That's a rarity these days. And it's not just happening here in the United States. This is happening all around the world. And this is threatening support for democracy, quite frankly. As this polarization gets worse and worse, people's confidence in the democratic form of government is declining. We also have fragmentation into special interest groups within politics. Now, in parliamentary systems, you end up with dozens of political parties competing in an election. That's the Dutch parliament there. There's 16 political parties in the Dutch parliament right now. So the coalition government there has 4 parties, and they have a prime minister who's not a member of any of them because they couldn't agree on who should be the prime minister. And that's just one example. You have a country like Bulgaria. They voted 7 times in the last 4 years because they can't form a new government. Israel's done something similar to that. You see in many countries in the parliamentary system of government, this fragmentation is making it impossible to govern. In the presidential systems, like we have here in the United States, just think about how many different interest groups are behind the Republican or the Democratic candidate today. It's an incredibly disparate amount of groups. So this is becoming a big challenge as well. And as we're dealing with all of these issues, we need governments that are able to effectively deal with them, not just for the benefit of their group of supporters, but for the entire country as a whole. But you can see why that's becoming more challenging. Geopolitical risk, not going to go away. The big issues, of course, are what's going to happen with the US and China in the future, what's going to happen in Asia, some of these big political standoffs between China and India, and in the South China Sea with Taiwan, et cetera. All of these have the potential to dramatically destabilize the global economy. Globalization, another thing, this is coming to an end. The era of globalization that we've lived in really since the 1980s is now coming to an end. It's much more of an era of regionalization and nationalization. Now, for some, this will be a benefit. It's clearly been benefiting the US economy in recent years, that $3 trillion of investment with the constant hammering from Washington to foreign governments and companies that you have to invest here if you want to do business here has worked. And again, that's one of the few things Democrats and Republicans have agreed upon, but it has both parties have championed that. It is a challenge, though. For many governments, many businesses, many industries have benefited greatly from globalization, and that era now is slowly but surely coming to an end. So this is also a threat. If we don't have governments that can handle some of these major issues we're going to be dealing with, that's a threat to the economy. And it's domestic and international risks that are rising. And you need to be aware of what the potential implications of that risk are. The third big change is technological. And this is perhaps the one that is right now on many of your minds, business-wise, because technological change is happening so quickly, and it's going to have such a profound effect on many aspects of our lives, not just our careers, but many others, that staying on top of this is absolutely paramount. What's happening? Well, one, technology is changing faster than it ever did. This chart just shows how long it took to adapt various technologies over the last century. And just look at how faster and faster it goes. Typically, it used to be a generation or so for technology to be adopted. Today, less than a decade and faster. Think about AI just really went into the public conscious 2 years ago. And look at how its profound impact is on the economy. So keeping up with technological change is challenging because many of your companies, you don't have people in place who understand this technological change. It's happening so dramatically fast. You need to have some expertise within your company, either in-house or someone from outside helping you to manage this technological change. It is going to be continuing. It's going to continue to accelerate. And what's quite frightening, perhaps, is that we won't be driving it all the time. There's no question that eventually AI is going to start its own technological changes. And we need to be prepared for that. It is going to happen. The world is clearly online. You know this if you have kids and look at their screen time of 16 hours per day or whatever it might be. The average person is spending 7 hours a day online today. 7 hours of your, how long are you awake? I don't know how long I sleep 7 hours a night. I don't know. So 17 hours if you're awake, you're spending almost half your day online in some form or another. The global e-commerce market is now worth $6 trillion. The global e-commerce market by itself would be the world's third largest economy. And that number is growing dramatically. It's almost become a parallel reality. People are living a lot of their life and a lot of their economic life online these days. And that's something that obviously you've had to adjust to. AI, of course, is the big one, and this is the issue that is dominating a lot of people's minds at the moment. This chart, I know you can't see it because it's written very small, shows which type of jobs are most at risk from the rise of AI. And just to be fair, this is the vulnerable sector here, and economist is right there. So I'm probably not going to be here much longer. I'm going to be handing out resumes out on the table in the back in a little bit. I don't think the Browns are going to hire me. But this is really important because the change, people have said, well, I haven't really noticed a change yet, but it is coming. If you look, and I do this for my fields, I'll typically look at job listings because I'm curious what companies are doing. And for example, in research, in economics, and all of this, every single job being promoted now has a part that says AI proficiency. Know how to prompt using an LLM, understand how AI works. And this is coming. If you're a younger person here in the audience, get a certificate. Start to learn about AI. Put that on your resume. You will stand out tremendously versus your peers. Understanding AI is going to be the most important job tool you could have going forward. And yes, for many companies, they haven't adapted it yet, or they haven't seen the benefits yet, but it's coming. And the big thing, and when I speak at a lot of these kind of conferences around the world, and there's a lot of AI speakers, and I typically hang out to see what they're going to say. And every one of them agrees the big thing and what's going to change this completely is the development of AI agents. And it's happening now, but it's in the early stages. This will be not where you're using AI to do a job, where you create an AI agent to do all the jobs for you. And that's coming. This is the next big thing. It's starting now, and over the next couple of years, it's really going to roll out. And understand what that means for you, for your business. If you're dealing with labor shortages, this is one way to solve some of those, right? You hire agents to do your marketing, to do your, come and give your speeches. Don't do that. But understanding this is incredibly important. This is going to change. And when is the big, if you look historically at changes in the labor market, when do they really occur? They occur during economic downturns, when companies reorient their labor force. They can, under the cover of everybody's laying everybody off now because there's a recession, that's when companies make the big, massive changes. So we've seen a lot of companies already announce big layoffs and a lot of the work being replaced by AI, but just wait until there's a big economic downturn and you see what happens when companies eliminate entire departments and turn to AI or other forms of technology to run those. So keep that in mind. The point is, if you don't know much about AI, start learning now, because it is going to be transformative for your business and your life. If you've seen me talk before, you know I say the only way we're going to grow economically, because our population is declining, because trade and investment growth is sporadic because of the tensions in the world, is through higher productivity. It's the same for your business. It's the same for the country's economy. And you know that for the last 50 years or so, productivity has been trending downwards. Productivity growth is almost disappeared in most major economies. Maybe some of this technology finally turns that around. Maybe finally we see productivity start to rise. We've seen a little bit of an uptick in the US over the last year. Is that related to AI? It's still a bit early to tell. But if we're not more productive, we're not going to grow. And it's those businesses that can do more with less vis-a-vis their competitors, they're going to win. And how you improve your productivity as a business is going to determine just whether or not you can win within your industry. So, what does this mean? A lot of the growth, of course, being driven by tech. A lot of the economy being driven by tech. Look what happened when DeepSeek was released the other day in China. Low-cost LLM, which didn't perform pretty well. NVIDIA lost $600 billion in market capitalization in one day. That's like the entire JP Morgan disappearing, their market capitalization in one day. It's remarkable. So the tech industry is obviously having a massive impact on the economy. There is a huge risk of being left behind. If you're not on top of the tech and the changes that are taking place, and they're taking place at a quicker rate than you can imagine, you're in danger of being left behind. And it's not just your competitors anymore. These technologies are reducing the barrier to entry to all kinds of industries. You may not have competitors that you know of yet who are on their verge of being created. So it's not just sleeping on this. You need to be on top of it and be ready to take advantage of all the technological possibilities out there. And hopefully, it improves your productivity. The last thing, of course, a changing environment. Last year was the warmest year in recorded history, at least since we've been recording this stuff. Some people don't like to admit that the world's getting warmer. I could sit here and say the Browns have won 7 Super Bowls. They haven't. I could just, it's true, but the facts say something else, and it's the same here. The world is definitely a warming place. We're seeing more natural disasters in major economic centers than ever before. And this climate change is impacting major economic centers. People in the United States are moving to the most vulnerable places in the country for climate change. The population of Florida and Arizona and the Gulf Coast continues, Gulf of America coast now, if that's what we're going to call it. I guess Google Maps is going to change the officially put, if you're in Mexico and you go on Google Maps, it'll say Gulf of Mexico, and if you're in America, in the United States, it'll say Gulf of America. I don't know. Anything could be renamed this. Do you have any new names for Tuscarawas County, perhaps? Crooked River? That's kind of right. So everything's up for grabs now as far as names. That's interesting because if you look at the Gulf of Mexico, the U.S. and Mexico both have about a 1,700-mile coastline, so it's about equal. So anyways, I'm going to avoid talking about that. Natural disaster risk. This is clearly significant. We saw what happened in Los Angeles just a couple weeks ago. In the middle of winter, in one of the world's 5th or 6th largest urban economy, we had fires sweeping into the city. You saw what happened in North Carolina in October. You've seen what's happened in many parts of the world. Natural disaster risk, both as a combination of climate change and people living in areas more vulnerable to natural disasters, are leading to a significantly higher natural disaster risk. Also, sustainability. Now, in some parts of the world, we're seeing a tremendous push towards sustainability, and others we're not. But by the end of this decade, and that's just a few years away, more energy will be derived from renewable energy sources than non-renewable energy sources for the first time. We saw that happen in the European Union this year. We've seen huge amounts of investment in China and India and other parts of the world in renewable energy. This change is definitely coming, and it's coming because there's a huge demand for energy. Now, demand for energy in the US and Europe has been pretty stagnant. In fact, it's declined slightly. But look what's happened in Asia. So today, we use 10 times more energy than we did a century ago. And we use 2.5 times more energy than we did 50 years ago. And while energy demand, again, in this part of the world is somewhat stagnant, it's going to grow tremendously in other parts of the world. And there's also sectors of the economy, some of those high growth sectors, especially the tech sector, demand for energy is significantly higher than a lot of economists foresaw. You look at some of these investments in the tech sector right here in Ohio, the demands for energy that they have are more than the communities can deal with at the moment. We need more investment than in energy. This could become a constraint on growth, much like labor shortages are, if we don't have the energy capacity in place. So we face potential energy constraints. Those countries in the US, of course, and right here in Eastern Ohio with the shale industry, those countries that have energy resources have a huge competitive advantage versus those who don't. Look at the price you pay for your energy and compare it to what somebody in Germany pays, for example. Huge competitive advantage for the United States at the moment. And of course, this is going to come with higher human and economic costs. Some of these climate-related goals we have are going to be very hard to meet because of this rising demand that we see for energy. So what does the longer-term picture look like? There are a number of trends that we need to be aware of when we think about the longer-term growth. This is 10, 15, 20 years now into the future. Again, we don't expect that the change to come from the fact that most growth is going to be generated by certain countries, certain industries. Demographic decline is just going to get worse. The number of young people is going to decline. The number of working age people is going to decline. How do we deal with that? How do you as a business deal with that? When your consumer market may be shrinking, your labor force may be shrinking. All kinds of threats will remain, environmental, geopolitical, social. How do you overcome those? How do you deal with those threats? And then the technological breakthroughs we've seen in recent years could be eclipsed by even bigger technological breakthroughs that we're not even capable of foreseeing just yet. So staying on top of technology is absolutely paramount. I cannot stress that enough. This is global economic growth by decade. We've grown by about 3% per year for about 40 years. The slowdown in the world's rich countries was offset by the rise of China in Asian emerging markets. Well, now China's slowing, and it's going to slow significantly over the longer term. So growth over the longer term is going to slow. Generating growth can become a little bit more difficult. The U.S. will still be the fastest growing developed economy because of some of our advantages in terms of energy, in terms of technology. But we can see again, growth slowing a little bit, 2.2% per year over the next 10 years. That's our forecast for the U.S. A little bit slower than where we've been in recent years. Emerging markets, Asia, still the center of growth. Africa, about 4% growth per year. Latin America, 2%. So emerging markets won't be growing quite as fast as they have in the past. A lot of these countries are facing the same demographic challenges that the rich world is facing. So what does this mean? This means it's productivity, productivity, productivity. James Carville said it's the economy, stupid, in 1992 when he was talking about the election. For business success and economic success, it's productivity, stupid. You have to be productive. Do more with less. You're going to have less workers and less consumers. So competition is going to grow more fierce in many industries. Those countries and companies that can do well, be more competitive, have the better products, the better services, the better customer service, the better profitability, they're the ones who are going to win. And there are going to be new drivers of growth. New industries are constantly going to spring up. We weren't talking about NVIDIA, for example, a few years ago. They've been around for a while, but nobody was talking about them. Now, everybody knows who NVIDIA is. And there are going to be new drivers. There'll be new companies, new industries that emerge in the next year. Keep on top of that. Try to identify those new growth sectors that are going to open in the years ahead. So how do you prepare for these changes as a business, as an individual? What do you do? Well, the first thing you're doing right now, you're educating yourself on what's happening. You identify opportunities for growth, for your business, for your personal finances, and you identify the risks to your business and your personal finances. This is part of what you do. You do this all the time. You're constantly learning about new issues that you need to be aware of, and that's a good start. What's very important, though, and a lot of people and companies get this wrong, is you don't have the resources in place when an opportunity arises. Tom Brady always says, your opportunity is going to come one day. Are you going to be ready for it? Like he was in 2000 when the Browns passed over him in 6 different rounds. Well, I had to put one more. I don't know what the over-under is, so I'm not swaying the betting markets, but I'm going to boost them a little bit. The important thing is have resources in place when these opportunities arise, because technology is changing quicker than ever. The world is changing quicker than ever. And if you identify an opportunity and you see it, you've educated yourself to it, you know all about it, and you don't have the resources in place to take advantage of it, well, it's great knowing about it. You're not going to grow your business. Same with on the other side of the equation. Do you have the resources in place to deal with risks to your business? If a new competitor arises, if somebody new enters your market and challenges you on price or in product, do you have the resources in place to respond to that challenge? So it's not just identifying, but it's having the resources, whether it's people, other factors of production, whatever it may be, having them in place. And then finally, developing strategies to succeed in what is a challenging world. Have the people inside your company who understand these changes and can help you to develop strategies. Bring people in from the outside who can help you. Get outside voices to help you to understand some of these challenges, to help you to grow and prosper over the long term. Well, that's it from me. What was it, 5 Browns jokes? Was it 5 or 6? So I think that's about par for the course. You would think after a 3-14 season I would have had like 300, but it's like beating a dead horse by this point. The Cavs are great, and they're not just great, they play beautiful basketball. It's like really nice to watch. So yeah, forget about the Browns. Who cares about them? I'm happy to take questions now, obviously, and then if anyone has any questions that they didn't think about now, or they want to contact me after, there's my email address. You can reach out to me. So.
What's the future look like for the cost and availability of liability insurance?
Insurance looks bad. It looks really bad right now. I mean, we've seen the insurance industry be hit, natural disasters being a very key component of that, and that's not going to change. And that was one of the reasons why many of the insurance companies pulled out of Los Angeles just months before the fires, because they weren't making money. And some of that was the legal changes that took place in California. But there's a lot of concern.
Yes. Okay, the question was about the future of liability insurance.
And the future is not very positive at the moment. And it's very hard to see how that industry is going to continue to be profitable in that climate that we just talked about, with people's ability to pay for insurance being stretched, and then with the risks facing the insurance sector from natural disasters and other types of risks. It's not a very rosy outlook.
There's a book called The Splendid Exchange, How Trade Saved the World. It doesn't have much good to say about tariffs. But it does say that the world is going to
Well, he asked about
if we saw a repeat of what happened in the 1930s with regards to tariffs. One thing is that it's much easier to move production from country to country as opposed to back then. So let's say you're producing goods in a country that's suddenly facing punitive tariffs. It's not as hard to pick up and move to a neighboring country that's not than it was back in the 1930s. So that ability to move around the world alleviates a bit of the threat. But because so many of the world's, my concern with tariffs is that we've seen some of the poor results from some of these major economies in recent years. Many of them are dependent upon exports to grow. That if we get into a trade war and tariffs take away that ability to generate export growth, we could be seeing very severe recessions in some very important economies. And that's my big concern. As far as a global downturn, just because of what happened with globalization as opposed to the 1930s, the impact of across-the-board tariffs would not be as great. And I don't think, I hesitate to say this, but I don't think we will see as severe of tariffs as we did back then. I think the understanding of global trade markets is far more advanced today than it was at that point. Hopefully. Well, I'm going to regret those words one day. Yes?
Yeah, won't the growth of AI in the U.S. also make the energy sector grow? The need for consumption of energy in the United States grow as well?
That's been the assumption, and that's one of the things what DeepSeek's unveiling this week kind of threw a curveball to, because the assumption was these ultra expensive, ultra high powered large language models were going to need a huge amount of energy. And you see Google investing in their little nuclear facilities now. And then here comes DeepSeek, produced on the cheap. Obviously, they took a lot of technology from others. And some of that assumption of the energy demand maybe was reduced a bit. Now, this is early days. We've only known about DeepSeek for a few days. But there's no doubt that that sector and other related sectors are going to drive up demand for energy here in the US and in other parts of the world. And you know, for example, the Intel facility, which hopefully is going to be done in New Albany, the demand for energy that has required. And we're seeing some other major tech investments in the Midwest, which right now we're being stretched to be able to provide them with the energy demands that they have. So yes, this is absolutely going to be a big development in terms of the energy sector, and it's also going to separate those countries that can attract that investment. Because like I said, here in the US, we're blessed with abundant energy resources. A lot of our competitors are not. And when these high growth sectors of the economy demand a lot of energy to grow, they're not going to be in place to attract that investment because they don't have the energy capacity. And it's also a big threat to many of the emerging markets who already are dealing with blackouts and energy shortages. There's no way they're going to be able to attract high-tech investment when energy demand is so high. So it's just going to push them. It's actually, this has the potential to widen the gap between the haves and the have-nots in the world economy. The assumption is always that the poorer countries will close the gap with the richer countries, but this has the potential to actually push that in another direction completely. Yes? That's a good question, and it's a hard one to answer, because I think in last year's presentation when I was talking about AI, I had the Terminator as my slide, which maybe hints to what I think a little. It has the potential to solve a lot of our economic questions because it has the potential to boost productivity, but it has the potential to create a lot of harm. Think about misinformation. I had an article in the Plain Dealer about that a couple months ago, how much misinformation is out there. It's human generated, but what's to stop AI from generating it much more quickly, much more effectively? It's going to radically change the workforce. Some of our career, you see where the economists are on there, some of our jobs are going to be eliminated, or at least not as made less important than they are now. So that's going to cause societal tensions. So I think there's a plus and a minus involved, and it's a very fine line as far as I'm concerned which way we go. And again, as AI becomes, as it becomes sentient and thinks for itself, that's a frightening thought, right? Frightening thought. If AI in the wrong hands, or AI itself becoming the wrong hands themselves, yeah, that's a concern for sure. Yeah. You can't put the genie back in the bottle, right? I totally agree. I know that some are, but a lot of them aren't. There's a lot of resistance to using it. Some professors, teachers feel like it's cheating. But for me, it's like having just a library at your fingertips, right? I teach a course at a university up there every once in a while, and I tell my students to get a certificate in AI, learn about it, because you're going to need it for the rest of your career, and if you don't have it on your resume, you're already a leg behind. And you can go online, and some very reputable universities or tech companies are offering certificates for a few $100s, and it's completely worth it. I mean, it just increases your earning potential significantly. You're not getting a top job in many sectors of the economy without it. And too many schools are ignoring it as far as I'm concerned right now. I raised that issue 2 years ago at the university where I was, saying we need to embrace this and go full speed with this. And there was some hesitation, of course. But I think over the next couple of years, more and more schools are going to have to adapt it. Yeah. Right. Right. But I think it changes so rapidly anyway. That's why some universities are struggling with the fact that a lot of companies are now telling their, let's say, their tech hires, you don't need to go to university, because just get your certificate and then just constantly update. Because technology is changing so fast. If you start a 4-year program and the beginning of the program to the end, it's changed. The technology's changed dramatically. For example, I'll go on initially ChatGPT, and now I use Perplexity a lot. And I would ask it obscure economic questions. And 2 years ago, the answers were dated. There was some hallucinations going on. It's really good now. I mean, I did some tests yesterday. I forget. I was just playing around with it. And let's see how good it is. And it was extremely impressive. So yeah, I think it's here. It's not going back in the bottle. And if you don't have someone in your firm who understands it, you need people who do. And it's primarily going to be younger people coming out of the university. But I would say for yourself, just learn how to prompt. The most important skill in the world right now is knowing how to prompt an LLM. Ask the right questions, learn how to smooth the feedback, and things. And again, start reading about AI agents. That's the big one. That's going to be coming in the next couple of years. Learn about that. Yes? It's basically you have your AI, you create someone to do a task for you, and you don't have to ask it again. It's like an employee, but it does the work for you. And that's every AI expert that I've talked to, because I do, like I said, at many of the conferences I speak at, there is an AI expert also speaking, and I'm always questioning them all the time. They all agree that's the big thing. That's going to transform AI in a lot of jobs. Yes? Yep. Exactly. It's like you've hired somebody, but they're free, or cheap at least. Yeah, and they don't get tired. They can work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You don't feel guilty about making them work 24 hours. Yeah, and it's coming. And if you don't do it, your competitors are going to do it. And the 2 days you spend on paperwork, they'll do in 25 minutes. The agent will do in a matter of minutes. So you can embrace it or not, but it's going to impact your business. Yes? They're definitely higher. I mean, the Chinese government's #1 goal is to keep the population under control and happy. And now with economic growth slowing, with youth unemployment, we estimate at about 25%, that's no longer the case. So they've definitely gone up. And that's why a lot of people are concerned that maybe China will look to do something in Taiwan or the South China Sea to get the population's mind off the economic troubles in that country, because they're primarily domestic troubles. Chinese consumers aren't spending because they're not happy with their situation. They're concerned about their economy right now. And that's a big concern for President Xi and for the Communist Party in Beijing. And if that continues, and as you see from my forecast, it's forecast to continue, my concern is more, what does China do to distract the population if it's not through economic growth? And Taiwan is the obvious possibility, but there are others as well. So it's a big concern. Yes? Do you have sleeping problems?
No, well, maybe, yeah. But if China is growing still at 7% or 5%, whatever it is, and they've got a declining population, I mean, and I know growth, I guess I take it as a given that growth is good because it improves standard of living, but why do they have 25% unemployment? You think that they would still be struggling with, having enough employees, given the fact that they're growing and they're growing, the economy's growing and the population.
Well, part of it is they have overcapacity just across the board. They invested so much in infrastructure, so much in manufacturing facilities, and now they can't fill them. So that whole segment of the economy, the construction sector alone, the infrastructure sector in China employed so many people, and that sector now is frozen. So that's a big reason. You saw a similar thing happen in Spain. Manufacturing went down. Yes? Sure. Yeah, that was also the case. Of course, get people employed, make sure they're happy. Yeah. Now that store would just have a bunch of automated tellers, like stores in here. Yeah. No Brown's questions. Great. Yes? Yeah. Certainly, we do commodity price forecasts for a lot of our clients. That's going to be a huge issue going forward. We've benefited tremendously here in the Midwest from foreign demand for soybeans and other products. We see the population growth in Africa, a place that doesn't have the capacity to produce a huge amount of food, and yet you have Middle Eastern countries buying land in Africa to produce food for them. So a lot of these areas where that population growth is going to continue are areas that have very low rates of food productivity, food production, and that's a significant concern. It's a real opportunity because we sit on what might be some of the best agricultural land in the world here in the Midwest, what is undoubtedly some of the best agricultural land. And having access to export markets is a real opportunity for rural areas of the Midwest to grow substantially in the coming years as demand grows in places of the world where they just can't possibly feed themselves because they don't have the land available. So yeah. Yes? Right. Well, you see in the current administration the real battle between the business side of the administration, which wants immigration, legal immigration obviously, but wants immigration knowing we need it, and then the other side of the administration, which really wants to curtail immigration across the board. We don't have the infrastructure in place at the present, to increase legal immigration. We just don't. If you fly internationally and you come back, there's very few personnel working at the airport. If you're crossing the border, we have shortages at our borders with Mexico. It's a real issue, and I think it's one of the most pressing issues we face, because we don't have the workers in this country. If we cut off all immigration, our inflation would go through the roof. Many sectors of our economy would struggle dramatically. Agriculture would, tech would, places where we just do not have the people internally to deal with this. And a lot of the sectors that require immigrant work are not those sectors that AI and automation are going to be able to replace. Think about the agricultural sector, for example. So we still are going to need some degree of immigration. I totally agree that we need to legalize more of our immigration, if that's the right word, but we need to, our economy, a lot of our growth, and every economist will say this, in the last years, immigration has been one of the three most important catalysts of that growth, that we've been able to offset some of this decline in working age population through immigration. Certainly, we've had this discussion up in Cleveland recently. The Northeast Ohio's population would have fallen far more dramatically without immigration. We had that surge of immigration from Ukraine in recent years because of the conflict there, from other parts of the world. So we need to find a way to balance that, our economic needs with our needs to control our borders. And we just don't have the personnel in place right now to control our borders effectively. One more? One last question, yes. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. No, it does. Yeah. No. And people are distracted by other, yeah. I've been arguing that that's one area we should be investing in heavily. Having people in place to vet people who want to come to this country, having a sensible border control policy. I mean, we could easily set up something with a laser-based system on the border as opposed to building a wall, which is, how effective is that going to be? We can beef up our border patrol. We can deploy more of our security forces to the border as opposed to, having a patrolman every half mile on the highway looking for speeders. Just one thought. I just noticed about 4 of them driving down. Yeah, exactly. That's not a popular thing here, though. But yeah, I've been caught by them a few times. But you're right. I totally agree. And this is a big issue because we need immigration. This is a country built on immigration. It's one of our great advantages. But we need to make sure that we know who's coming in. And yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much.
All right, so I want to present you this gift. Why don't you take a minute and open it? And this was made by a local company, Warther Woodworking. Dan Warther is a grandson of the great Moody Warther.
That's really nice.
Yeah, go ahead, Ty. You got to see it. It's a cutting board, but especially made for you. Also want to say that next year,
Oh, thank you. There it is. Got the groundhog.
got a little groundhog in it.
It doesn't see a shadow.
No shadow.
No shadow.
Hopefully that's a good sign.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and there's
Oh, yeah, there's some.
oil and wax in
Right,
there to
thank
take care of it. So next year, Friday, January 30th is the last Friday of January. So if that works with Michael, I suppose you'll have to check your schedule, but we'll do Groundhog 19th.
It's worked every year so far.
All right. So Friday, January 30th for next year. And thank you all. Let's give one last round of applause and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.